Last week, Bleacher Report released its Quarter Century Mount Rushmores for all 32 teams in the NHL. Now, the main question is, did they get this one right? Or could there be a case for someone else to be there? But overall, not bad for 25 years of Carolina Hurricanes hockey with this group of four on the Rushmore.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything but short Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Murren. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Hours, also the co-host of the Search Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On the Monday edition of the show, we're going to be going over the Bleacher Report's Carolina Hurricanes Quarter Century Mount Rushmore to see if they nailed this one perfectly. Also, could there be someone that might dethrone one of these guys, or is it mainly just a huge honorable mention? And then finally, we're going to wrap up the show with me giving my Quarter Century Mount Rushmore for the Carolina Hurricanes. But before we jump into all of that today, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONAHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, Bleacher Report, in Bleacher Report Open Ice, dropped all 32 teams with their Quarter Century Mount Rushmores. Now, for the Carolina Hurricanes, they went with, obviously, the face of the franchise, even as a coach. Rod Brind'Amour also went with newly retired number Eric Staal, current defenseman Jacob Slavin, and, of course, current center Sebastian Aho. Their reasoning for the Hurricanes Quarter Century, well, a two-time Frank J. Selke winner Rod Brind'Amour is fourth among the team, among the Hurricanes with 299 assists and fifth with 473 points, and of course also did captain them to a 2005-2006 Stanley Cup, and then, like I said, won the Selke in 2006 and 2007. Now with Eric Staal, was part of the 2006 Cup run team, also sits second among the franchise with goals, 322, 453 assists, and 775 points. Now, if you're going for just Hurricanes numbers, Eric Staal will be leading the Hurricanes, just them alone in all these categories. But with the Hartford Whalers, Ron Francis does hold those numbers. Jacob Slavin, fifth among Hurricane skiers, is 745 games played and won the Lady Byng in 2020-21 and 23-24. And then with Sebastian Aho, third all-time in the franchise with 283 goals, 348 assists for 631 points. Now, and I even mentioned this on social media, if you're talking about a quarter century Mount Rushmore, this is probably the best list of guys if you want to put on this Mount Rushmore. Because like I said, you're talking about a face of the franchise as the captain and won the Cup in 2006 and as the head coach, and Rod Brind'Amour. That's kind of a no-brainer. Eric Staal, like I said, he is a guy who basically, if you talk just Hurricanes numbers, if you don't add what Ron Francis did with the Whalers, yeah, Eric Staal basically leads the team in goals, assists, and points, and a plethora of other ones as well. Jacob Slavin, obviously, is probably going to go down as the best defenseman in Hurricanes history. Of course, like I said, he's fifth among all skaters with 745 games played and is a two-time Lady Byng winner. Should be three, different conversation. And also Norris, also another different conversation. And there's Sebastian Aho, already third all-time in franchise with goals, assists, points. And, of course, if you take out the Whaler stuff, he's technically second. And he's currently breaking a lot of records as well, especially for power plays, shorthanders, playoff points, goals, all of that stuff. Sebastian Aho could be a guy who could be a record holder for a lot of these in terms of, if we're talking just Carolina Hurricanes, it could be a solid second in overall franchise. And the thing, too, is signed through the 2031-32 season, which you love to see. So overall, I think if you ask me about the Bleacher Report's Mount Rushmore, in terms of did they nail this? I would say that yeah, it makes sense. And I think that when you look at this, it's probably the best four that you could think of for the Carolina Hurricanes if you're talking a quarter century Mount Rushmore. If we're talking from the 2000-2001 season to basically now, before going into 25-26, these are the best four, in my opinion, if you're talking about a current Mount Rushmore over the last 25 years. Even if you talk about even the, 97, 98, 98, 99, 99, 2000, even if you add the few of those in, I still think these are probably the best four guys to have overall when you talk about a Mount Rushmore list. Like I said, in segment 2, I am going to be talking about guys who maybe could dethrone one of these guys in terms of making the Mount Rushmore. What just these four have done overall in their careers, and especially when you look at it, like I said, Eric Stahl second, the whole franchise. Technically first, if you're just talking about the Hurricanes, Sebastian Aho is right there as well. Rod Brind'Amour's not far off. Like I said, he's fifth all-time in points with 473, 174 goals, 299 assists. That's a pretty solid number to have, all things considered. And you can look at other guys as well, like Jordan Stahl, Teuvo Teravainen, and those guys put up numbers as well. There are some guys within the quarter century. A lot of them are kind of early on, like maybe like a Jeff O'Neill, stuff like that. Could you see, Eric Cole, Sammy Kapanen, and Ray Whitney? There's Justin Williams. There's a lot of guys that could make a case to make this quarter century team. But overall, I think those are probably the guys that you would go with in terms of, okay, this is our quarter century Hurricanes Mount Rushmore. You're talking about Rod Brind'Amour, captain that led the team to winning a cup. Eric Stahl, part of the team, the only guy who's ever hit 100 points for the Carolina Hurricanes, a captain for a very long time, second in franchise history for a lot of records. Slavin is going to be the best defenseman in terms of Hurricanes history, barring none. I'm sorry to say, but that's just going to happen. The fact that he's already there in terms of that too, it says a lot when you're talking about a guy like Slavin, who's not that far behind Glenn Wesley. Glenn Wesley's had 913 games played, but 227 points. Slavin's already at 299. Slavin is already at 299 in terms of points. He's only 1 point off of 300. And he's only 6 points off of 250 assists. And he's 5 points. He's 5 goals off of 60. Like he's not that far off from catching Glenn Wesley. I think Slavin has the potential to get 1,000 games played. Just because he's got 8 more years of hockey to play. And he's already played 10 is at 745. It's not that hard for him to get 1,000. He might be the second guy ever in Hurricanes history to hit that number. Of course, Jordan Stahl could get to 1,000 for the Canes, but Jacob Slavin's definitely going to be there. So overall, I think this is probably the best quarter century Mount Rushmore you can go for in terms of looking at what these guys did. So I think, all in all, Bleacher Report kind of nailed this. I think they did a good job with getting the best 4 guys possible. If you're talking over the last 25 years for the Carolina Hurricanes, going from 2000, 2001 to just before the 25-26 season. Like I said, there could be cases to be made. But overall, if you had asked me who if they had to pick 4 guys to go for this Mount Rushmore, I would definitely say these are the 4 to go with. Rod Brind'Amour, Eric Stahl, Jacob Slavin, and Sebastian Aho. It's kind of tough when you talk about, a guy who captained the teams, won individual awards. Another guy who was part of that same team holds a bunch of records, second in a lot of these points. And you have a third guy in Aho who could be on his way to breaking a lot of those records that Eric Stahl made. And of course, Jacob Slavin, by the time his career's on, he's going to be a Carolina Hurricane for life. Could be another 1,000 games played with the team and could be considered and probably will be the greatest defenseman in Hurricanes history. But that being said, could someone potentially dethrone one of these guys, if all things considered, if you could put up a argument for that? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. And, it's hard for people to do that when you can need to hire someone. But, you got the pressure. There's the everyday of going through and not finding the right person. Could be a setback, but that's the thing with Indeed sponsored jobs that comes in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now, so you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, well, Indeed is all you need. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we started off the show talking about Bleacher Report's Quarter Century Carolina Hurricanes Mount Rushmore, talking about Brind'Amour, Stahl, Slavin, and Aho. I think this is probably the best 4 that you can go with. It makes a lot of sense why they went with these guys for what they have done. But the thing is, could there be someone to potentially dethrone one of these guys? I would say that if you look at skaters, you could maybe potentially say that with the fact that you do have a Jordan Stahl, who's got 463 points in 897 games with the Carolina Hurricanes in 13 seasons. In terms of Hurricanes, that's the longest tenured Cane, all things considered. When you look at that, when you have like Jacob Slavin, who's played 10 years, Glenn Wesley, who's played 13 with the Canes, there's, and of course, Wesley did play also with the Whalers, so you can kind of looking in terms of where, if we're looking franchise, yes, Wesley is there for 13. Some was with Hartford, but Slavin's done it for 10. Ryan Brind'Amour did it for 10. Eric Stahl did it for 12. Jordan Stahl's at 13. Now, like I said, Jordan Stahl is 6th in points for the Carolina Hurricanes. 178 goals, 285 points. Could he be someone? Potentially. Potentially could be someone, the fact that he still has a couple more years left on his contract. Is he going to get to 500 points with the Hurricanes? I definitely think he will. Definitely is going to get 300 assists at least. Could you look at possibly Teuvo Teravainen? Played with the team for 8 years. 415 points in 555 games. He's got a plus 105. That's pretty dang good for Mr. Teuvo Teravainen. Could he be someone? Potentially. Of course, it's tough when you look at plus minus. You see Jacob Slavin's a plus 167, which is just absolutely unreal. That Jacob Slavin's plus minus is that good. And the next best is Sebastian Aho's 121. Tavo's is 105. So 3 guys plus minus in the plus 100s. Not bad. There, like I said, could you, I think, could have Andrei Svechnikov eventually get there? Maybe. Could you look at Sammy Kapanen? 348 points. Of course, you're talking Whalers and Hurricanes because you had to put the Whalers a little bit, 95, 96. Could you look at Ray Whitney for 5 seasons, 334 points? Justin Williams, 2 stints, 8 years with the Canes, 360 points, was the captain of the team when Ryan Brind'Amour took over, did score that big winner in Game 7. Could eventually be Seth Jarvis. A lot of potential names. If you're looking at skaters, there's a lot of potential guys who could say, hey, I can make a case. Definitely Jordan Stahl, Tavo, maybe Andrei Svechnikov at some point. But we're talking quarter century. Now, if you look at goalies, could you say Archer Zerbe? 6 seasons, 309 games played. Of course, we're talking 99 through 2004. A little early into the 2000s. 130 wins, 122 losses, 44 ties or overtime losses, 906 save percentage, 249 goals against, 20 shutouts, 17,000 minutes played. Yeah. You can look at Archer Zerbe. Freddie Anderson, 124 games. Pierre Kachekov, 116. One guy whose number should be retired, but he is in the Hurricanes Hall of Fame. The guy I'm looking at to potentially say, hey, I could be on this Mount Rushmore because there's a lack of guys in this one position because it's a defenseman and 3 forwards. But there's one guy that's not on this list in a position that's not really featured on this list. And who's to say that you can't look at Cam Ward? 2006 to 2018, 13 seasons with the Hurricanes. Did have 1 year with the Chicago Blackhawks, but basically 13 out of 14 years, Cam Ward was a Carolina Hurricane. 668 games played, most in franchise history, of course, because he's the longest tenured goalie at 13 years when no one else is remotely close to touching that. Archer Zerbe played 6. Sean Burke played with 6, of course. Yeah, some Whalers into there. Justin Peters for 5. Frederick Anderson for 4. Pierre Kachekov for 4. Not a lot of goalies had a long tenure with the Hurricanes outside of Cam Ward. Cam Ward is the only double-digit guy. So, of course, game starts, he leads 569. Most wins, 318. Does, unfortunately, have the most losses at 244. Good bit of that was during the dark times of the Hurricanes when they were missing the playoffs and losing a lot of games. Of course, that happens when you played the longest. You are going to have the most losses when you've been with the team for 668 games. 84 ties or overtime losses. 1,728 goals against. Of course, when that's going up against 18,989 shots. But 17,261 saves, not bad. Now, in terms of save percentage, though, of course, you do have Mike Murphy, Corey Delizio, Alex Nedeljkovic. Those guys are going to have some high save percentages. But all in all, Cam Ward is 11th per se at a 909 save percentage. Really 7th if you look away past those guys who've played a couple, 1 or 2 games who have 1,000 save percentage. So removing those first 2 guys, Cam Ward is technically 9th in save percentage. Goals against, if you take out George Alves, Corey, and Mike, who got all zeros, you do look at Cam Ward, who's 16th in goals against average. He does have a 270. Frederick Anderson's a 227. Hey, not bad, though. Pierre Kachekov, 247. Yeah. But Cam Ward's 16th in goals against. It is what it is when you've played so many games. Shutouts, though, how about 27 for Cam Ward? Next best is Archer Zerbe's 20. Of course, currently Pierre Kachekov has 10. Frederick Anderson has 9. Minutes, 38,436 for Cam Ward. Next best, Archer Zerbe, 17,816. Goals, hey, Cam Ward, only goalie goal. It counts. Tied in points with Sean Burke. Of course, Burke did a lot of that with the Whalers, but Cam Ward, 12 points, goal and 11 assists. So if there is someone who I could say that could surpass, maybe replace one of these guys, I'd say Cam Ward. I see Cam Ward would definitely be on the Quarter Century Mount Rushmore for the Hurricanes. Just the question is, who do you remove from this list? Obviously, you can't remove Rod Brind'Amour. Face of the franchise, captain, Selke winner, current head coach. The coach that's has continuously been successful. He's eventually going to get the cup win. Eric Stahl recently just got his number retired. Leads a lot of records for the Hurricanes. Jacob Slavin, arguably the greatest defenseman for the Hurricanes the last 25 years, and could be all time. Sebastian Aho, third in a lot of these categories, also breaking a lot of records as well. Does Cam Ward replace Sebastian Aho and put a goalie up there? Possible. But that's kind of the thing. Who does it? Who gets on there? Like I said, there's a lot of good candidates that we've mentioned. But if there's one guy I would say that could maybe make a case to get onto the Mount Rushmore for the quarter century for the Canes, it has to be Cam Ward. Yes, I know his goals against and his save percentages, losses are not the greatest, but hey, you played 13 seasons with the Canes, and a good bit of that was on very bad teams where he really got no help. It is what it is, but he is the greatest Carolina Hurricanes goalie, bar none, honestly. So that's where it's kind of at. Who would let me know in the comments? Who would you say that you could maybe make a case to make the Mount Rushmore for the last quarter century? If you want to say who could potentially replace an Aho, a Slavin, or a Brendan Moore or a Stahl, let me know in the comments what you think. That being said, who would I put on my quarter century Mount Rushmore for the Hurricanes? We'll stick around and I'll tell you who I think should be there or could be there here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally, feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. It makes it simple to review your finances with your spouse. You can both see the budgets, goals, and spending activity all in one place so you're on the same page. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNAHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we talked about Bleacher Report's Quarter Century Mount Rushmore. We talked about who could potentially replace one of these guys on the Mount Rushmore. Now it's time to give my Quarter Century Carolina Hurricanes Mount Rushmore. I will say this, the first basically 2 guys are going to be slam dunks. The third one, could be the toss-up with number 4, and could there be someone to replace one of these guys? Well, I would say this. First 2, pretty simple. Rod Brind'Amour, Eric Stahl, obvious, duh, it makes sense. Like there is no Carolina Hurricanes quarter century or franchise history Mount Rushmore. If you're talking relocation Hurricanes, there is no Mount Rushmore if there's no Rod Brind'Amour there. It's just plain and simple. You can't have a Mount Rushmore without a Rod Brind'Amour. It just makes sense, especially when you're talking quarter century of the franchise. And that's not even including him being the head coach. Just him being a player. Yeah, Rod Brind'Amour is on that list. Eric Stahl, obviously, only 100-point guy. Stanley Cup winner, captain for a long time, holds a lot of records, second on the team in a lot of the franchises in terms of points and all that stuff. If it's just straight up Hurricanes, he is first. If you're not counting Whalers, he is first on a lot of these. So those are my 2 slam dunks. Brind'Amour, Stahl, duh. It just makes sense to put those 2 guys there. Rod and Eric are both on the Mount Rushmore. Now it comes down to who's my number 3. And this will make things interesting when it comes to my number 4. Number 3 has to be, for me, it's Jaccob Slavin. Because you're talking about a guy who's 5th all-time in games played. He's going to probably get 1,000 games played for the Hurricanes. First guy for if we're talking just Hurricanes, Slavin will be in the 1,000 games played list. He's going to hold a lot of records. He's going to go down as the greatest defenseman in franchise history. We're even including Whalers here. I think Jaccob Slavin's going to be that guy, the greatest defenseman of all time for Hurricanes and Whalers. Now it comes to the hard part. Do I stick with Sebastian Aho at 4 for this quarter century Mount Rushmore? Or do we go off the board a little bit and not go with Bleacher Report's 4. Even though I have said on this episode, you heard me saying, well, one, that this makes sense. If you're talking about 4 guys to pick, if you're talking overall, and that people are like, yeah, I can agree with this, then yeah, you will have Slavin, Aho, Eric Staal, Ron Brendamore. For me, for the sake of argument, and I'm kind of curious to get people's thoughts on this in the comments, or if you're on YouTube or if you're on social media, One True Zach on X, if you want to hit me up there to let me know your thoughts on this. I'm going to go a little bit off of what Bleacher Report said. I think Sebastian Aho is a very close 4B in terms of making the Quarter Century Mount Rushmore. But I think if you're going to make a Quarter Century Mount Rushmore, I think you have to give a little bit of a nod to not just skaters when it comes to this list. And for me, I think you've got to put Cam Ward on the Quarter Century Mount Rushmore for the Hurricanes. Yes, I know he has the most losses. He's 9th in save percentage. He's 16th in goals against. But you are talking about a guy in Cam Ward who does have the only goalie goal in franchise history, does have 12 points, has played 668 games. He's the only goalie in double-digit years of playing for the franchise. 318 wins. The next goalie is Archer Zerbe at 130. It's a wide margin. And like I said, yes, because he's played a ton of more games. Like he's played over 350, 9 more games than Archer Zerbe. And yes, but, he does have 1,700 goals against, but does have almost 19,000 saves or, shots faced, but has saved over 17,000 shots. And he also leads the entire franchise in 27 shutouts. So you can look at some of the numbers and be like, yeah, but he's got the most losses, his goals against and all this. And I understand that. But you're looking at the tenure of what Cam Ward did, and he played a lot of seasons with no good backup. They were throwing him in 60-plus games a season when the team was not that great. Bad roster construction, terrible coaching, honestly. We're not going to go down the path of the coaching because that's just a whole – no one needs to talk about that. Kirk Mueller, I mean, he got the really bad end of the stick on that one. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Like I said, you could say that, yes, Sebastian Aho definitely should be, if you're going to put him on the Mount Rushmore, that's completely fine, 100%. I agree with that. But if you're asking me, and if I think that there should be a little bit more of a historical representation of the Hurricanes, I think you got to put a goalie here. And obviously, it's got to be Cam Ward. Like I said, Aho is a clear. You could almost swap Aho and Cam Ward out. Some people might say maybe you could swap out Slavin. But if we're going forwards, you got to put a defenseman there. It has to be Slavin. And I say you have to have a goalie there. If you're talking about how the team overall in their history, you got to have a goalie there, and it's got to be Cam Ward without question. So my Quarter Century Mount Rushmore for the Carolina Hurricanes, you've got to give me Ron Brind'Amour, Eric Staal, Jacob Slavin, and Cam Ward, with Aho being a very strong 4B honorable mention. So it's basically almost the same thing as the Bleacher Reports, except they had Aho there, of course. And I even said that you could look at Cam Ward as a 4B honorable mention for that list as well. So you really could interchange Aho and Cam Ward. But if you ask me, mine would be Brind'Amour, Staal, Slavin, and Ward for the Quarter Century Mount Rushmore. But if you're on the YouTube, let me know in the comments, who would you put on your Quarter Century Mount Rushmore? And if you're on social media, like I said, hit me up at OneTrueZach on X or LO_Hurricanes. Let me know your Quarter Century, Mount Rushmore for the Carolina Hurricanes. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you agree with mine, or do you agree with Bleacher Reports, or do you have an entirely different list for your Mount Rushmore? So let me know what you think about that. But that's what I'm going with. If you're talking about the history of the Carolina Hurricanes in terms of Mount Rushmore, you've got to have some representation in the goaltending department, and it's got to be Cam Ward. So I'm curious to hear what everyone's thoughts are. But it's pretty cool to see, something like that where you kind of look back at the history and like, oh, yeah, I remember this guy and this guy and this guy. It's a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So let me know about all of that. That being said, this will be the end of the Monday episode of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL Podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or where you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneSureZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin. You can click the link tree in my bios to find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating or review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Make sure to subscribe. Hit the bell notifications so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up. Tell me know if you like the show as well. Share with all other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.